today's episode, we're going to talk about why learning goals are not just about compliance or, my principal told me I'm supposed to post
Write it
the
on the
learning
board.
goal on the board for transparency, and that the learning goals are not just restating the standards or expectations. They're far more nuanced and impactful than that, and also so critical to any type of learning you're doing, whether that's in the classroom with students or in professional development with educators.
True, true. And I think it's been glossed over the whole like write it on the board because the research says like learning goals are important for students to understand and connect their learning to what their big like what the big purpose was here today. Like that's an important component of learning. You've got Hattie like stating that that's an important component. You look at the print 8 effective principles from principles to action. It's in there. Like it's learning goals is one of those practices. And so it was like, well, we better make sure everybody writes the learning goal or tells everyone the learning goal. But really what you end up seeing was like, they're just writing the expectation from the curriculum documents, or they're writing like what the chapter title was, or they're writing something like, I can calculate or solve 2-step equations. Like these are the learning goals that typically get written, but then it's like you said, compliance. It's like the research says we should do it, so I'll write it up, but then I don't actually use it in my lesson, or I don't connect it, or I'm not doing any sort of other things that are essential to why the research is saying that that's an important, and you've used the word before we hit record, it's critical point of like the lesson.
I think it can be emphasized enough, truthfully,
Mm-hmm.
how important it is to, in particular, a task-based lesson.
For sure.
Like if you are going to dip your toe into a task-based lesson, and we don't want it to get the bad reputation of being discovery or aimless or totally student-directed, it's like the learning goal is the glue that holds that lesson together, that allows you, and we often hear this from our district partners where we have coaches and leaders saying, teachers aren't consolidating the lesson. Teachers aren't landing the lesson. Kids are going and doing things, but then they're not bringing them back together and emerging the big idea and then doing formative assessment around that big idea. And I think we can probably diagnose that the reason that the lesson is not being consolidated or landed is because the teacher has not internalized the learning objective or outcome for that lesson.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're just not well positioned to consolidate.
Right.
And that goes back to like capacity building and doing lesson study and
totally
using PLC time to understand what the learning objective or outcome or goal is for today,
for
or
sure.
the unit.
For sure, because I think you're still relying on like what you remember from, you flip the page to this chapter, or you look it up and you download the teacher guide, and it says the title, but then you're like, okay, I got this because I remember what the general outcome is going to be here about this procedural approach. But if that's the case, again, if you're teaching from a task-based perspective or a problem-based perspective or a lesson plan, you're absolutely right. It is critical because you give off the impression that it's like, oh, this is a free-for-all. And sometimes you think it's a free-for-all because you're like, I'm going to immerse them in this experience and they're just going to learn it. And kids go home and go like, I don't know what was going on in math today. And the parents start calling and complaining. It's mostly because you didn't tie it with a bow. And if you've listened to this podcast, this is going to sound like we started this podcast in 2018. This is episode 452. So if like we haven't done a math mentoring moment episode in quite some time. But it was a regular part of the early episodes. And mostly because, our work, if you're listening now, our work has shifted into supporting schools, school districts, doing system-wide planning and professional development planning. But we were coaching teachers through problem-based lessons on the podcast in those mentoring moment episodes pretty regularly. And if you were listening back then, or if you listened to some recently, because you're scrolling and you're saying, hey, I want to know the answer to that problem, and you listen to that episode, you probably are hearing Kyle and myself talk about intentionality, because that was the biggest theme when we were coaching teachers, that they were going into these types of lessons, whether it was a building thinking classrooms lesson, a number talk lesson, a math talk lesson, a problem string lesson, and they just didn't first take the step to go, well, what is my true intention with this lesson and what we really want to uncover. Like, what behaviors of math do I really want to uncover here today? What is the essential learning that we want to carry forward today? It's usually we didn't do that pre-work. They didn't do that pre-work. They're like, we're going to go in and do this, but then I didn't tie it with a bow. We left before it was over, and kids are wondering, what was this point of this? And we coach those folks to say, like, you got to tie it up. You got to tie it with a bow. You got to make sure that the intentionality is there for you, but also them. And that's an important component because it helps guide the next move. It helps guides all the moves that you're going to be making, but also makes it clear. I was like, what is the intention here today? So you'll also hear us probably say back then, it's like, don't write the learning goal on the board. Reveal it later. And that was one of the moves that we made early on in our work. Whether you write it at the beginning or the end, to me, it didn't matter as long as it was very clear to everyone in the room what the purpose was and the intentionality. And how do you know? Like, how do we know that we hit that learning goal here today, and so that we can make adjustments moving on? So I agree. Absolutely critical.
You also mentioned, this is not new. We like learning goals came out here in Ontario with Growing Success, which is, I think, 2010.
Yep, that's exactly right.
Yeah, like 2010 when they were released. And, around the same time as the 8 effective teaching practices, establishing learning goals is one of the practices. So, this is not new, but I will tell you that my understanding of learning goals has evolved since then.
All right, tell us.
When I think back to myself in 2010, 2011, 2012, I think I was probably just writing the curriculum expectation in student-friendly language. So it's like, okay, just take this expectation and make it more student friendly, less, education jargon, make sure students can understand it, see themselves in it. But I feel like since then, and I think partly, heavily influenced by 5 practices for orchestrating productive mathematical discussions, I understand now that a learning goal is not just taking a curriculum expectation and restating it. It's really connected to big ideas or generalizations or conjectures that you can make about the behaviors of mathematics.
Give us an example.
Okay, perfect. So we have a session this Friday, and I want to restate that this is important not only for classroom teachers who are engaging in task-based lessons in the classroom, but also for people who are delivering PD.
Essentially. Yes.
Right. So it's like, we are delivering PD on Friday to principals, coaches, and teachers. And we are going to start with a task. And 10 years ago, I would have written the learning goal for the task that we're doing as, we will calculate the mean. It's like an action. It's something that we will do. It's a performance task. Now I'm going to write the learning goal for Friday's session as, we will understand that mean is the process of redistributing the values in a data set evenly.
Big difference.
Huge difference. Because what I want from Friday's session is for people to understand the behavior of finding the mean. Like, what are we actually doing beyond just, add up the numbers and divide by the number of numbers? I want them to visualize the idea that, like, we're going to use graphical representations, so like stacked bar graphs, or a bar graph to show that, we can actually imagine these were linking cubes. And we could actually take the quantities and redistribute them so that every one of those bars was the same height. And that's the learning goal. That's the epiphany. That's the aha. That's the conjecture that I want people to walk away with. The lasting, enduring understanding.
Yeah. Think of the difference that your lesson takes knowing one goal versus the other.
They're totally different lessons.
Exactly. So It's like they could be the same. Here's my point, though, is that they could be the same lesson on paper from here to here. But if you knew one versus the other, the moves you make during that lesson are going to be, in my opinion, completely different.
For sure.
Because you have to keep asking yourself, this is what we do when we deliver any sort of learning to any group, is you have to continually ask yourself, did we hit the learning goal now? Did we hit the learning goal now? How do I know? How do I know that I've hit the learning goal? Like, you have to also answer that beforehand so you know when you hit it, right? So, like, this is the important part of when you unpack a lesson. My old self would have said, like, well, I'll just tell them the learning goal at the beginning. I will teach it to them straight up. And that will be, I'll know, because my only success criteria here was, like, I delivered and not actually, like, went around and made sure. Or I'll quiz them 2 days later. That was the way I used to do it. But But think about the moves that you make because you know one learning goal versus another while you're delivering that lesson, because you're saying, like, did we make it clear to now that we've had the epiphany that this is what mean is and this is what we're trying to uncover here today, versus like, did they just calculate it? Because it's completely different. Now let's go one step meta, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because what is your learning goal to deliver this PD to this group of people? Because I'm going to argue that you've got a learning goal. That is a learning goal for this group for sure in that task. But what about the entire session?
Well, and I think that and it's a great question. It goes back to the objectives that they've identified as
Right.
a system, right? So they've said, they want reasoning, they want discourse, they want a conceptual understanding and procedural fluency. These are things that they want for their students that they're working toward. And so I think about my own journey. It's like, how did I evolve from we will calculate the mean to we will understand the behavior
Mm-hmm.
of mean as the redistribute? Like, what was the journey? Because if we want students to be able to, engage in productive struggle and reasoning and mathematical discourse and, explain their thinking and use a variety of connected representations, all of the practices in practice, I feel like my learning was twofold. It's like I needed to learn the content.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what we're also trying to do for the educators participating in this professional development.
And
It's
the
like
leaders.
every chance we get, how are we building our own mathematical proficiency? Like as mathematicians ourselves. Like are we interacting with math in a meaningful way that we are having these epiphanies and making conjectures and almost shaking our belief of what we knew, this procedure that everyone's like, well, just memorize the steps. And then the next year the kids forget it and they have to be retaught it every single year. So I think that part of the PD on Friday is to just engage in the mathematics. But then also when I think about my own journey, it's like I had to build up my own mathematical proficiency around the concepts that I taught. But I also needed like 5 practices. I needed to understand that the learning goal wasn't just about being able to do something. It wasn't about like I can calculate mean. It was about big ideas, lasting, enduring understanding, which is how they define learning goals. And they give examples in that book. But, if you read 5 practices, they show you the distinction between like a performance task and an actual true learning goal.
Right. Yeah. And I think another goal, learning understanding for this group that we're like, not only are we trying to give them this specific math epiphany, is that we want them to have the continued reinforcement that epiphanies in math actually matter because of the experience you just described, is that you needed to have epiphanies before you could think this way.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So which means like you want leaders, and this is why we've designed the professional development this way as an important outcome. It's like we need to design professional development so that we create epiphanies for everyone, because we're speaking mostly to leaders, and we want leaders to realize that I need to also create epiphanies for my teachers, because I can't get them to create learning goals in this way without that experience. Like they need to ask themselves, what is the big, understanding, what is the continued learning, the big idea that I want them to carry forward. We're not going to have that. Like we're going to continue to write learning goals that say I can calculate the mean, because I need to have that epiphany first. And that's a big part of this session, is to help leaders realize that they have to actually plan for this. They have to build that in. Those are the lasting understanding that we want the system to think about and system to design moving forward, because that isn't just a one-time thing. It's a bigger thing than one.
So for our listeners today who are like, okay, we agree, we
Right.
agree that learning goals are important, and learning goals, where is the opportunity to do this work within your system? So that's kind of our call to action. It's like looking at where are your opportunities to have networks of educators come together to engage in math, to co-construct learning goals, to talk about the big idea or the lasting enduring understanding from a particular lesson or high priority standard. Does that opportunity exist within the system that you support? And if not, where can we create that opportunity? Because this is the work. So if you're saying to yourself, my teachers aren't consolidating, my teachers aren't landing the lessons, my teachers aren't engaging in meaningful formative assessment of student learning, it's likely part of the areas that needs to be strengthened is our understanding of learning goals and how they guide our practice in the classroom, our facilitation, the questions we ask, how we consolidate, how we assess. And so if that's the maybe pebble in your shoe right now, or the problem that you're seeing across your system, the other problem you likely have is you don't have a professional development lever to be able to engage teachers in this type of thinking and build their capacity for it. It's not likely going to happen for the masses if there isn't time and space to dig into this really important work.
I prioritize it for sure. Now, some inside info is we had to think about what is the learning outcome for this podcast episode, because you have to do this work anytime you're trying to convey a message or teach someone anything. And that is the same message we're trying to convey in this Friday session that we're going to be doing with leaders, is helping you realize that there's these epiphanies that need to happen and we need to plan for them. So those are good next step moves, Yvette. Another next step is to think about your tree, your leadership tree, your classroom tree. We hinted on learning goals, which to us is a branch of your tree. This is the pedagogical moves that you have to do the pre-planning, you have to think about what that lesson's going to look like. But also on the leadership side and also the teacher's side, an important limb of the tree is your capacity building, understanding that it's almost impossible for us to do some of the moves that we really want to do in our classroom to create these types of experience if we're not continually strengthening our own capacity around mathematics. And that's how we want to strengthen that tree. One last move here for you is we've put together 50 different principles, understanding and creating math improvement plans. These are the principles that we help our teams with. These are the principles that we help that teach through our courses. And here on the podcast, if you want access to all 50 of those principles and how they can help you structure your math improvement planning, you can head on over to makemathmoments.com/ebook, makemathmoments.com/ebook, and grab our free ebook on the 50 principles that strengthen math improvement planning.